And I'd like to give a warm welcome to Ingo Barkow, the chair of the DDI Scientific Board, to discuss the purpose of the meeting, as well as the meeting agenda, and to start the meeting. So over to you, Ingo.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. Yeah, also a welcome from my side. I will also start my presentation now so that you can see what is going on. So welcome to the first actually real scientific community meeting, because we called the last time the annual meeting the scientific community meeting, which was not really correct. So to make it clear from the very beginning, this is not the yearly meeting where we basically vote on things like the scientific plan. This is actually what we are doing today, is more or less the promise that we built up when we started reforming the scientific board. We said we want to have more interaction with the community and to also get your ideas and get feedback from you and start new working groups during the year. Because we had the feeling that the annual meeting might not be enough for that and might also have another purpose. In the annual meeting, we basically report what has the scientific board done the last year. And in the community meetings, we have actually a rather different approach. We want to hear from you and we want to have discussions from you. We want to exchange some ideas with you and also motivate you maybe to join the working groups that have, for example, started in the meantime. So this is also the overall idea of this meeting. So the agenda for today is, at the beginning you get, as you can see at the moment, an intro from me. So basically a welcome from my side. I'm really happy that you can make it today also virtually. In those times, in my institution, half of the people in the classes that I teach, half of the people have COVID and are in quarantine. I hope it's different for you. But I'm really happy that you can make it, and we are recording also mainly for the purpose because we got some info from people before that registered for the meeting and said that they cannot participate for the obvious reasons. So this is basically now the introduction, and we'll also talk a little bit about the scientific board and the working groups, because I'm quite aware that some people are new and some people are also not at the moment not really involved with the working group, so might not have heard that there are new ones and that how the new structure basically works. But this, I try to keep this short, maybe 10 to 15 minutes perhaps. I try to do my very best because we have only 2 hours. Then we will have some rounds of discussions. It will basically, for 3 topics, always the same structure. So we will first have an ignition talk, and afterwards you have the possibility to discuss with us. And also the people who are giving the ignition talks have also put some questions on their slides. So the first ignition talk will be by Carsten, who gives an ignition talk about the DDI URN resolution and the work of the URN resolution temporary working group. Yes, there are temporary working groups, and actually this is a temporary working group of the scientific board itself. So there will be, I think he will talk more about that. So there will be ignition talk in the discussion afterwards. Then we have ignition talk from Arofan about the mapping between different specifications, also ignition talk, afterwards again discussion. And we could also win Arofan to do a second talk afterwards, a third topic for this day, cross-specification mappings and implementation guidelines. So same structure, ignition talk, afterwards discussion. I think each of these blocks is maybe something like 20-25 minutes. And at the very end, as end of the meeting, we have from the vice chair, Hilde Orten, we have an outro. So where we basically also invite for free discussion as well. So we can give feedback, what you would like to have or hear from us, or if you have new ideas, ideas for upcoming meetings, or also the basic question, how often should we have this meeting here? So how often should a meeting between the scientific board and the scientific community happen? Because in the end, we are the people who represent you within the DDI Alliance. And this brings me also to the next point. So this is actually the scientific board. I don't want to talk about too much about the old scientific board versus the new scientific board. So because I think I did this 3 or 4 times in the meantime. But for the people who don't know, we restructured the scientific board in 2020 and had a new one in 2021. And with a different structure. I am the chair at the moment. Hilde is the vice chair. And we have 5 more members. So we are 7 in total. Darren Bell, Simon Hodgson, Flavio Rizzolo, Carsten Thiel, and Joachim Barkow represent the members. That said, the idea in the scientific board is a little bit different than some people might be used to in the working groups. So I know there's a tradition in the DDI Alliance that the chairs and the vice chair have the political power on speaking on behalf of the working groups and doing arrangements. The scientific board is much more democratic. So Hilde and me are more or less like the representatives and speakers. But for example, for decisions, we have always to go back and take a vote within the board. So this means we have always a vote between us 7, and chair and vice chair don't have a special role with that. So every vote is equal. But you see also 2 things. There are 2 people more on the list because the scientific board also has 2 ex officio members. At the moment, it's Jared as the executive director of the DDI Alliance, and Wendy Thomas as the chair of the technical committee, because the technical committee is a standing working group, and therefore it's permanently represented in the scientific board, but they are not allowed to vote. So they're ex officio. Voting members are only the elected members. And also, actually, the scientific board has also 2 more positions, because we can have 2 advisors in the scientific board. This is basically also to broaden the meaning of the word scientific. So a proper scientific board should always have some kind of also a scientific agenda. And therefore we can also bring up to 2 people in externally and can basically make them also a non-voting member of the scientific board. And later we will also ask for recommendations, because this is a task, these are roles that are currently not filled. But scientific board, scientific community, what is your role? So basically, the scientific board is voted out of by the member representatives out of the DDI community to represent the scientific purposes, the scientific plan on behalf of the scientific representatives, which is you, or most of you, in form of the scientific community. So in the old days, it was like that. The scientific board consisted of a chair and a vice chair, and the assembly of the scientific representatives was called the scientific board. But we found that this was very inactive, basically. We met once a year, and basically more or less the chair and the vice chair were working, and the rest of the year nothing much happened, and therefore we had the idea to restructure that. This means we have now this new scientific board with the 7 members representing the scientific representatives within the scientific community. And the scientific community is basically the broader chamber of all the people who are scientific representatives. And basically what we are doing is a scientific board reports to the scientific community. And one thing that I wanted to highlight is the thing in the middle, because this is what we are currently doing. The scientific board will invite the scientific committee to virtual meetings during the year to seek more input and engagement. That's why we're here today. So this is exactly this engagement meeting to activate the community, to get feedback on what we are doing, to get new ideas, to also take some ideas from you, and also try to bring them into a planning format. I don't want to talk that much about the scientific plan, because this is the main thing that we have at the annual meeting, which will take part most likely close to IASSIST if we keep the tradition. I don't know if it will a physical meeting or a virtual meeting or a hybrid meeting. This is something that has to be discussed. So at the moment, we have no idea how things are, but this will be the next formal meeting then that we have with you, simply to report what we have done and how much we fulfilled the scientific plan that we created roughly a year ago. So again, the purpose. As I said, I outlined, this was the thing that I had in bold, seek more input and engagement. So you can now voice opinions, you can voice wishes, you can basically have the opportunity to say, please, scientific board, we have the following problem, or we have the following ideas. What can we do within the alliance to support these ideas? This means mainly creating new working groups, either permanent or temporary ones, because it's not like that. Maybe also the scientific board steers the working group and steers the operative or via the scientific plan, the further development of the alliance or the tools provided by the alliance or the frameworks provided by the alliance. But what it does not do is it does not really take an idea and then basically work on it itself, because we have so many working groups that we are responsible for. Therefore, hardly anything is. It's more an administration facilitation job. So therefore, normally when you have ideas and we say, okay, we have to do this, then we try to initiate a new working group. Just as we did, you just saw the temporary working group on UN resolution. That was a working group that we then started within the scientific board with a limited number of members, and also getting some people from outside in for this specific task. And this is something that we can also do for other ideas or for other purposes. Then also, I would like to advertise, this is the reason why I have in the next slides also the working groups themselves. They don't have to report today. That's again something for the annual meeting. But I would really like to advertise participation in working groups, because this is where the real work is done. So this is where really the people who are interested in one topic come together, start working on this topic, start publishing papers, start creating frameworks, writing, modeling, ontologies, etc. So this is really where then the proper work is done. And also, I would like to thank everybody who is in the working group for the great work that was done in the last year. Yeah, and this is also exactly what we like to hear. Proposals for new working groups or potential working groups, where we can see, can this attach to DDI or not? Then something for the very end, or for also then maybe what we can ask again in the outro. You heard earlier that we have not filled the advisory member positions in the scientific board, so we are very open for suggestions. So if you know somebody who is who would be a great fit to extend the reach of DDI and the DDI Alliance, and maybe has also a scientific background, this would be a good person to have as a kind of a liaison, maybe also to other metadata standards within the scientific board. So we are really happy if we hear nominations for this role, but we'll come back to that perhaps later. Yeah, and also I would really like to advertise that, maybe I go one slide back, or two slides back rather. You see that the terms of 3 of the members are ending actually this year. So we have a system where some of the members have a 4-year term and some of the members have a 2-year term. And we have 3 members that have only a 2-year term. This means they can, of course, put themselves up for re-election. I don't know for the 3 persons if it's like that. But we have currently, but I expect, especially as I know that at least one person of them will retire. This means we will have positions open. So if you like what you hear now, or would like to also support the DDI on a more meta level, then you might consider to run for the scientific board. As I said, we will certainly have, as the terms are ending this year, we will have elections for the scientific board at the end of the year after finishing the 2-year term, so that the people, because I know that it says 2023, but this is the beginning of 2023. So the terms started in January 2023, 21, and basically are lasting for 2 years. So the members' terms will end at the end of December or the beginning of January. Yeah, and also, again, apart from the outro, we would like to discuss the frequency and the topics of further meetings. So you can have really for this these community meetings are your meetings. So basically, you can have an idea what you would like us to do and what we would like to talk about with us in the next meeting. So it's a little bit focused also on audience participation. Introducing the new working groups or the old working groups, or perhaps the working groups in general. So these are the current working groups of the DDI Alliance that not all of them are basically facilitated by the scientific board. Also, there are some that are facilitated by the executive board. For example, the marketing and partnership working group is belongs at the beginning. All working groups belong to the scientific board, but we also in creating the new structure, we also focused on restructuring such things because it simply belonged better to the executive board. So we have the controlled vocabulary working group. We have the cross-domain integration or CDI working group. And this is maybe one that you might not have heard if you are not too closely connected, because you see this one was established in 2020. So it's one of the new working groups. The name says everything. Controlled vocabulary deals with controlled vocabularies, and CDI is about connecting to other metadata standards. And yeah, but you will hear either way more about that later. The glossary working group found out that our glossary is not in a very good shape, and therefore, and it's completely outdated. And therefore, this is a working group. This is actually our newest working group. It was just established in autumn of last year. It's a working group that basically focuses on reworking the whole glossary, that we have proper terms for the things that we name in DDI. Talked already about the marketing and partnership working group. This is an older one. Also, one of the newer ones is the paradata working group, which also extends the look of metadata also to a special form of metadata, paradata, which is something like log files or basically service steering while a survey is running and things like that. So this also creates descriptors, but the problem is they don't fit into a metadata scheme, but they're also not really data. So it's in between. I'm actually not a huge fan of the term paradata. I sometimes also call them rather technical metadata, but that's semantics, I would say. Then also, actually existing for a longer time, I can say this for two groups. It's a structured data transformation language, STDL working group, and the extended knowledge organization systems, the XCOS working groups. Both were informally existing already for several years. And we took the new scientific board basically to formalize those working groups so that we made them official, because then they can also tap resources, for example, if they have some ideas, they can apply for funding, which an informal working group actually cannot. So therefore, it makes a lot of sense to have that. Then we have, as the last but really not least, the technical committee. The technical committee is just like the executive board and the scientific board, a body that is specified in the bylaws and has the special that it's a standing working group, so it cannot be dissolved. It's a permanent one. So it's not on the same level like this. It's not a board like us. So it still reports to the scientific board, but due to its important work of the technical specification, it's highly important, and therefore has also a little bit of special role. So this is also one of the working groups you might consider entering, especially if you are highly interested in IT or technical stuff. So that's actually, I don't want to make it this too much something like of an annual meeting style, but one of the successes actually of the scientific board has been that four new working groups have been started. So there is more work on more topics, so there will be more input and things that go into the standard. As I said before, the work, oh, Hilde, you say something?
Yeah, the trading working group, very important working group.
It should be there. I copied that. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. Actually, this is version 2 of the slides. So this, I think on version 1, they were still, I don't know, maybe they moved one under my screen. So yeah, okay. So of course, very important is the training group, which basically does the outreach and brings DDI to new people by doing trainings on in form of workshops at conferences, and also engages in, for example, this is something what we like to do here at my university, have also, as we are doing metadata and data management trainings as well, and have actually in information science these topics. It would also make sense a lot for us to also at least train the social sciences and educational sciences students in DDI. This absolutely makes sense. And also the training group provides not only training to the people, but also trains the trainer, so that you could also go out and spread the word of DDI in your own organization and also organize trainings. Very important group. I have to apologize that it's not on at the moment, not on the list. But as I said before, working groups are the places where the main design work takes place. And yeah, if you look on the homepage, you will find all of these groups, including, of course, the training group. But you will also find a group that de facto does not exist anymore. So if you go to the homepage, you will find a DDI developers community. I was in this group. Actually, it was never the official DDI group. It was actually people connected to DDI who wanted to do their own thing. If you look there, also the minutes from the meetings, the group is essentially dormant since 2014. And one of my goals, it's now my second year, is my second and last year of chairing this group. I said I only want to do it for 2 years for the beginning when the new group is formed, but my job is actually too stressful to do this permanently. So my goal now for my second year is to re-establish this group, because we need somebody who, the technical committee, of course, takes care of the technical implementation of the standard, but they don't provide tools. They don't provide software. That's not their task. So there should be a group for people who write tools and do software development. And therefore, my goal this year is to re-establish the DDI developers community as an official working group. Because people who are long with DDI, longer than 8 years, might remember the old slogan from the developers group: no tools, no standard. It's very nice if we talk about something like ontologies, RDF, XML schemes. How can different things from different studies be expressed as something in the ontology or some node or something? But the problem is this has to end up in software at some point, because otherwise we have a nice documentation, but we have no users. And therefore, the idea is to have something again like the DDI Tools and Software Development Working Group, which basically bridges a little bit the gap to the TC, to the technical committee, between standard specification and tool development, which is actually happening. It's not like that there is nobody writing DDI tools, but it's not really, there's no place anymore where those people who are really IT people, who are programmers, where they can go to. And this group basically should be there to create new tools, new frameworks, for example, organize hackathons, organize meetings, organize regular virtual collaboration, that maybe we can get more software and also can get people who work already on software closer together so that, for example, we have not that much double development, or at least people who also program in one language or in one framework might at least have some ideas and can basically move them to the products they are developing. So I find this group very essential, and it has to be reestablished. And I can say one thing, kicking this off after 8 years is quite tough. I talked to a lot of people who were involved in the old times, and it's hard motivating them. So therefore, this will take a lot of effort to reestablish this dormant group. And therefore, but I'm looking very positively in the future because it's very useful. And it might also be really a good idea because there are so many people working on this. So, yeah, and you see, as a university professor, I'm used to talking. I wanted to talk for 10 or 15 minutes. I made it half an hour. That's normal for me. So I hope I did not steal too much from the people following me. If there are any questions, just put them in the chat or shout them out now. Otherwise, I would like to hand over to the first ignition talk. It's the one about URN resolution, I think. It's Carsten.
Yeah, thank you. If you stop sharing, I'll be...
Yes, I stopped sharing.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the work of the DDI URN resolution temporary working group. It's quite a mouthful. It's a temporary working group established by the DDI Scientific Board. As Ingo mentioned, I'm a member of the Scientific Board. For those who don't know me, I work for CESTA-ERIC, the Consortium of Social Science, the Consortium of European Social Science Data Archives, out of our main office here in Bergen, Norway. And I'm leading the temporary working group. And today the idea is to explain to you a bit what it's about, why we're working on this, and what we hope to come out, and where maybe you can come in helping us. So let's start by DDI URNs. URNs are used as persistent identifiers in the DDI specification. And they're directly linked and built on the DDI agencies directly into the specification, in particular for DDI lifecycle. And agencies need DDIs, and also users have needs towards the DDI URNs based on if they find one, they'd like to know more about it. The DDI URN namespace is formally registered. That was a step that took quite some time. It's officially registered with the IANA namespaces. So there is now the first step done to making them functioning on the technical level. And the idea is that DDI URNs should be resolvable so that they can actually be used in practice. As I said, any user finding a DDI URN might want to find out what this URN represents, what the instance is behind it, and so on. So why the temporary working group? The idea is that we need to propose high-level goals and policies regarding the resolution of DDI URNs. And we also need a description of which kind of related technical services would be needed. There has work been done already by the technical committee on some of these technical services that are already clear that we can't live without. But there are some possibilities of what we can, should, might, or want to implement for URNs in the DDI namespace, depending on different needs from the agencies, also for the alliance and for the end users. So, for instance, there are a number of open questions. It's mostly about responsibilities. There's a question of how much work is there in the URNs for the alliance versus how much work is there for each agency. And that is particularly exemplified by the question of centralizing or decentralizing the entire infrastructure. And when I say entire infrastructure, there are two aspects to it. One is registering a DDI URN, and the other one is resolving a DDI URN. The first one is usually a manual process. Of course, you can do some automation there as well, but the resolution is generally a very automated process for which you need some technological components that actually help you with this. And as I said, there's a question of how much should the alliance do? How much should the agency do? How much does the alliance want to do? How much does the agency want to do? How much does the alliance have to do? How much does the agency have to do? So there's a lot of back and forth that we've now been discussing for quite some time, but we are coming to a point where we're understanding the pros and cons and possibilities for each of those, and we're working on a document. I'll talk about this in a moment. It comes down to the question of flexibility. The more we allow flexibility for each agency to do what fits their use case best, the more power we give them. That also means we have less harmonization because each agency might choose to do things very differently from the others. But for the alliance, it might be an argument to say we want at least certain things to be harmonized across all of the agencies so that certain things can be stated by the alliance for any DDI URN. And of course, if every agency has to implement this infrastructure, there's a question of what does this imply in terms of effort, duplication of effort, deduplication of effort, how many things need to be done more than once, which technical components can be reused, and so on. And finally, there's the user-facing side, mostly the resolution. If you find a DDI URN in the wild, how do you find out what's behind this? Should there be mandatory functionalities that we impose on all DDI URNs that every agency has to implement, being well aware that an agency is not necessarily a very big organization, but also individuals have their own agency. But these very big organizations might want to have some optional functionality that they want to implement that's not necessarily needed for every use case, but for specific use cases. So this is a bit the background, the open questions we've been discussing back and forth in regular meetings and where we're writing the documents on. And now I'm unfortunately repeating the word questions, but this is more about questions to you, from you, your comments and your remarks. What are your use cases? What are your needs? Do you have any input now or in the future? Would you like to comment on what we're working on? Would you like to get involved with this work? It's not necessarily the situation that we're right now prepared to say the document is ready for consultation. We think there's still a bit more to do, but we are approaching a state where we do agree on the general principles underlying it and writing it all down. I put down the names of the other members. It's a large representation from the board. We heard earlier there's 7 + 2, 9. So this is 6 people. That's already 2/3 of the scientific board who are meeting more than once a month to discuss this topic for an hour to an hour and a half. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for the attention so far. And with that, I'd like to open for questions, comments, volunteers.
Yeah. I see Achim raises his hand. Achim, please.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, thank you, Carsten. I have just some additional comments, because this topic is very technical and could be finally very boring. What is the purpose of persistent identifiers and the resolution of that? We can do really interesting stuff with that. We can build repositories where the content of the repositories can be reused over the persistent identifiers, either in an organization or over the network in a distributed virtual network. We can build registries. And so this is an essential part of a vision of a global metadata virtual network. And therefore, this is important. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Achim. Other questions or comments for Carsten?
Yeah, I mean, if I can just add Sorry, Hilde, if I can just add to what Akim was just saying, I think even registries can be quite boring. So I would say to sell this, you just need to say, if you want to do fair and you want to make anything interoperable, you know, this is something you really have to do.
Okay, thank you very much, Darren. Do you, Carsten, have any comments to any of this, or are there other?
I mean, that perfectly adds to the things I was saying, and obviously the things I was missing. And I think John has a comment.
Yep, John?
Yeah, only you mentioned that you're coming to some sort of resolution. So, haha, sorry. I wonder whether you might give a hint what that might be, if what your broad sort of thinking is at the moment, because it might be, because obviously, you know, some people, it might be useful just to summarize that for this meeting and obviously get the fine details when you publish.
Right, I was maybe a bit too optimistic there. So it's not that we found a solution to what we actually want to do. It's just that we've clarified the different problems that we have to address.
Okay.
What we're thinking and right now is that it's not an either-or situation, that there are different needs from different users, and that we need to find a balance in between. But we haven't come to a specific, okay, this is exactly how it should be done. So at the moment, there's still a number of issues that we're solving, but it looks like some sort of hybrid model that we need some sort of baseline, as I said, so that the DDI lines can say, well, a DDI URN, if you find it, you'll find out what it means. But we don't want to force every single individual researcher who's using DDI to document their studies to go in and register each of their URNs manually and point it to a document. In particular, given that not all documents are available online. So DDI URNs have other purposes than, for instance, DOIs, where you always assign this to something that's published somewhere. It might not be directly accessible openly. There might be barriers, subscriptions or other. But DDI URNs might point to instances that are never meant to be available to anyone, just for internal purposes. And placing an undue burden on these use cases is something we certainly need to avoid.
Yeah, so I suppose from the Alliance's perspective, I was thinking as well, and one of the, as far as I understand it, some of the options might include having a standing infrastructure, which obviously the Alliance may or may not be responsible for maintaining, and obviously that is an enormous commitment. And you know, much as I love the Alliance, and have done for several years, its forte is not building infrastructure, maintaining infrastructure. And that will be, I think that, you know, if we're going to go down that route, then I think there needs to be a broader discussion outside of the technical considerations. That really, you know, because basically, you know, if we're going to invest in an infrastructure, we have to maintain the membership. We'll have to be paying to maintain it for, you know, in perpetuity, really. So that is quite a major decision we'll have to make. So I think there's need to be a proper mechanism for consultation around that. Rather than
so certainly one is, so we were writing a proposal that will then be submitted to the executive board to make some sort of decision ultimately. Part of this will be an explanation which scenario will need what kind of investment. The thing we should keep in mind is that there is at least one agency that is called the DDI Alliance. So it's not the situation that if we say, well, it's up to the agency to solve everything, that the DDI Alliance gets out of this that easily, because the Alliance themselves has the need for these services.
Can I just be clear what you just said? So you said that the proposal will go to the executive. I mean, my understanding of the way the constitution of the scientific committee was drawn up, as I was on the working group, was it will make a proposal to the community and then that will then go to the executive rather than the other way around?
Yeah, so the executive board will need to make the decision on the investment, and we will first have to have consultation from you. How the exact review process will work and consultation process is something we need to specify it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Achim has his hands up. Achim, please.
Yeah, I think John raises here important issues. No? I think one issue he started with is the if the DDI Alliance goes for maintaining an infrastructure, this is a large responsibility, and there are costs with that, and these should be really considered and discussed. And if the decision goes to this path, yeah, especially the costs have to be discussed. You know? But first, and that's the other important thing John raised, I think there should be really a broader discussion on the basis of the report of this temporary working group. You know? And then there could be then basically a final report after broader discussion, and then something has to be decided. You know? And the executive board is the right place for this kind of decision.
Okay. Thank you, Achim. And then Bill.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to echo, I think, what John and Achim said. The executive board may, in the end, receive a proposal, but we would very much welcome a filtering through the scientific board and the input from the scientific community on any proposal that has scientific relevancy coming to the executive board for a funding request. I think that's super important, and that would be really valuable to the process and to the decision making by all involved.
Okay, thank you. And then Slava.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Carsten about infrastructure he was talking about. Is it centralized or distributed? Because it can really change the vision how everything should operate together, should work together.
Yeah, that is exactly the thing we're still discussing. It's one of the open questions on this slide, centralized versus decentralized for both registration and resolution. The underlying technology of resolution is DNS. Having that decentralized is very possible because that's the way DNS is designed. Then again, having this infrastructure in place is also not a trivial service. And there are pros and cons for both. Having a central solution for this would mean that the agencies don't have to bring in the own effort to registering this, similar to if you're thinking of central PID services like DUIs, Epic Handles, and so on. There, this is centralized for good reasons. Within the DDI Alliance, there are questions that some agencies will have specific requirements that may not apply to all, that will require additional development or specific services that is beyond the capability of the Alliance to provide for everyone. So this is still part of the ongoing discussions in where is the middle ground, what is the possibilities, and there might very well be more than one solution proposed in the document in the end that needs to be a decision made on, or that will at least multiple proposals that will then be sent out for comment, broad comment, so that there is then a basis for making a decision which of the ones should be used based on what are the needs and interests within the community.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, some further questions for Carsten. Otherwise, I suggest that you, Carsten, go back to the slide that. Okay, I see Achim's hand again. First, Achim.
Yeah, just as a comment, when after there will be some decision on this issue, and we have some possibility to build a infrastructure like a virtual metadata network. We need something else. We need a standardized query protocol to query, for example, for a variable or for a concept. And that would be a topic for our next working group.
Good point. So thank you. And Slava, do you have your hand up again, or was it?
No, I just forgot to remove it. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. But I remember one of your slides, Carsten, you had some questions, yeah, regarding involvement. Yeah, when you see these questions, audience, do any of you have, Wolfgang?
Yes, I think the question that Carsten has first in his list is the most interesting one, because if you talk about maintaining or building an infrastructure and maintaining it for specific purposes, then it's all about, yeah, for which use cases do you want this to happen? And I think they might be very different for specific organizations. And I don't think it's enough to look at it on it at in a technical way and to say, okay, you can exchange any DDI object via this infrastructure, because this does not reflect that maybe for certain purposes, like reusing a question from a specific survey between institutions, that is not the same as just saying, okay, I just want to exchange some small code element or so. And I don't know, maybe you have already use cases discussed or available, but on the other hand, it might be good also to ask the community what are the expected use cases, and then the proposal about building an infrastructure for it would be much more solid.
Okay, thank you, Wolfgang. That's a good point. Yeah, other comments or interests to contribute to this, either with use cases or have a look at the documents? No more questions? Do you, Carsten, have a concluding comment before we move to the next?
Well, as I said, I put my name and email address there, so you can reach out to me or to any other member of the group. Mind you, Ingo isn't actually, and that's my mistake. The slides will be updated for the publication. You can contact us with your input, with your interest in expressing a use case, expressing something, or also for later input when the formal review, when we will have some formal review. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carsten, and for everyone for the good discussion. And then we can move to the next talk that is about mapping between specification and other implementation topics. And that will be done by Arofan Gregory, who is chair of the CDI working group, and Flavio Rizzolo from Statistics Canada, and also member of the CDI working group, TC, and a scientific board member, has also contributed to this. And as Flavio is here today, maybe you would like to share the presentation. That is basically up to you, but yeah, we are looking forward to your presentation.
No, Flavio, it's not up to you. You're giving your own slides, man. Hello, everybody. This is maybe a little different kind of a talk than what Carsten just presented, because the work in the URN resolution is ongoing and is focused within one working group. And when we were asked to, Flavio and I were asked to give an ignition talk. I don't know where that phrase comes from, but ignition in American English means two things. It means putting the key into the slot in your car and starting the engine. And it means lighting things on fire, right? So I don't know which of those senses we're supposed to be dealing with in this talk, but the way we chose to interpret this was as a way to raise issues that maybe were not currently being addressed directly. And I think what we're going to be talking about today is actually a couple of different issues that are more cross-cutting, that maybe impact more of the different working groups. Between Flavio and myself, I think we represent a bunch of the groups you can see here. Training and glossary, 3 S's in glossary, that's not good. The CDO working group, the technical committee, Flavio's on the scientific board. So I think we've been involved in a lot of different stuff in the Alliance for a long time. So I don't know if what we're going to represent in terms of what we say is fits neatly into any one of those categories. I think it might impact more than one of them. I want to make a couple of quick observations. Hello, slides, there. I've spent many years working with standards bodies, and I think the job of a standards body like the DDI Alliance, we're not setting like, industry best practices like an accounting standard or something. Our job is to make it easier for implementers to do what they need to do and user organizations to do what they need to do. And there's lots of different ways that happens in terms of communication, in terms of technology and systems design and support. And I think we all understand that. That's really the key job of the Alliance. It's not to tell people what to do. It's to help them do the things they need to do. And critical to that, and I think Ingo's comment about the developers group is very much in this direction. Our primary users, in one sense, are implementers, because even though we do this for the end users, at the end of the day, we reach the end users and support the end users by helping implementers build systems that promote data reuse, that make it easier to manage data, to collect and produce data, and so on. And when I say implementers, I mean that very broadly. So not just developers, but also systems designers and the people who are involved on the business side and who fund and prioritize and so on. All of those people are implementers in this sense. My second observation is that we exist in a very changeable world, and everybody's used to seeing information technology change these days. And that's become sort of just part of the background of our lives. But the data world is also changing a lot recently. New sources of data, new methods of analysis, stuff like machine learning. And the value of data as a resource is actually growing, I think, in the modern world as a result of sort of networked technology. And when you look at grand challenges like COVID and climate change, I think you see that there's a lot of developments, because there need to be a lot of developments to sort of do the things we need to do. And that the evolution of data and technology brings these things together there's no way to separate these concerns, if you will. Which leads me to a perspective. And I don't know if this is, people will agree with this or not, but I'd like you to think about it. Traditionally, standards bodies sit back and they say to the users, what do you want us to do? Tell us what you want. And that's traditionally how standards organizations work. But I don't think that is really a good idea in the modern age, because things are changing so fast. I think part of the value of what the DDI Alliance does is helps the users communicate and to discuss the things that are coming down the pike at them, to deal with change and to help them communicate about what they need, because that's ultimately what our job is to figure out what is really necessary to deal with in the face of change, and to help implementers deal with that change, and organizations deal with that. And so that's a perspective, I think. It's not directly what we're going to talk about, but I'd like people to bear that in mind. I think that the DDI Alliance can't afford to be passive in the face of the kinds of things we're seeing. And so I'm going to turn to sort of the ignition topics we were asked to discuss. Because we weren't sure if Flavio could be here today, we sort of ran this into one big presentation and maybe a little bit shorter one. But we're covering two topics. One of these is really mapping. And that's both between versions of DDI standards and between DDI standards and other standards and models. And there's starting to be a broad range of things in the DDI stable. But there are also other standards people use quite often. And the mapping between them is, from a technical perspective, from an implementer's perspective, pretty much the same, honestly. DDI standards tend to be more like each other than they're like things outside of the DDI, but SDTL is what it's always been before it became a DDI product, and so on. I feel like those two topics are a bit related, and we're going to address them kind of together. And then I want to talk a little bit about implementers guides. Now, these are topics that have been around forever, and they're not sexy like the idea of URN resolution and producing this networked virtual metadata repository out of the internet, like Carsten's discussion. But these are things that implementers deal with all the time. And it's hard to build a system without doing mapping, without doing some selection of the elements from the big models that DDI provides. And so I think these are important topics, and maybe topics we haven't as a community addressed sufficiently in the past. First, to talk about the mapping between standards, and those are both DDI products and external ones. A little bit of background here. I think the DDI Alliance, at least in my experience of a couple of decades almost now, has always been concerned with mappings between its own products. The first activity in developing Lifecycle was to look at what was available in codebook and try to reorganize that, but very much based on a spreadsheet that showed the mapping between the two. And we've always tried to be good citizens in the standards arena. That is, things like Dublin Core have always been of interest to people developing DDI, to MARC records, these kinds of things, METs. And that set of standards has changed over time, but I think the Alliance has always tried to be a good citizen in terms of aligning with other standards and making it possible for people to do those kinds of mappings. And we've always done a lot of mapping work. The mappings haven't always been easy to find or use. They haven't been very consistent. There's no really centralized distribution in some sense. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's not. It's been all over the map. I think we've gotten better over time. The awareness of this has grown. There's more reuse of underlying models, like between Lifecycle and now CDI. Codebook has been retrofitted to better fit what's in Lifecycle and to enable migration. So I think we've done a good job. And there's been a lot of work around external standards like Dublin Core, RDF syntaxes, SDMX, GSIM, Bravo. I could go on with the list of standards that we pay attention to now. But the thing to be aware is that when it comes to mappings, they're incredibly resource intensive, and they're never the primary deliverable for a working group. When you're doing Lifecycle, when you're doing CDI, when you're doing any of the products the Alliance has, your first job is to work on the product, and the mappings are always a supporting deliverable. And I think for that reason, in an all-volunteer organization, we sometimes have not necessarily supported them well enough. And I think it's a complicated area, but that's kind of why we're putting it on the table here to think about this. I do think this is still an open topic and maybe something that we should think more about. I'm going to turn over to you, Flavio, now, because really, I think the best way to get into this is to look at an example out of StatsCan. And Flavio has prepared some slides that really look at kind of the issues around the requirements for mapping and some of the complexities there. Stats Canada does a lot of functions that other DDI users do. They collect and produce data. They have a lot of archival function. They support a lot of researchers. They publish data like any stats agency. So I think they're a good use case, and they deal with a lot of different standards, which also makes them a good illustration. Flavio, can I turn over to you now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, just tell me when you want the slides to move.
Okay. Oh, I thought that I could share it, but yeah. So let's go to the next one. So thank you, everybody, and I just want to go over a few ideas that we are playing with, because some of these are being implemented to some extent, but some others are just paperware at this point, in which we are trying to figure out exactly what to do and how to go about it, especially the ones that are more machine actionable ones, and we are going to get there. So the first question is what are mappings good for, and why do we need it? And Arofan already touched a few of those points in his presentation. It's just that I want to emphasize now that this is also very closely connected with interoperability. Like, it's very difficult to do any interoperability or FAIR, as we mentioned before, without really having some way of relating content in one model or under one type of schema or conceptualization of the world or viewpoint into another, and doing data exchange and doing data integration. All those things require some sort of mapping, working at some level of precision, let's say. Let's leave that fuzzy for now. And that's why we are looking at mappings, and that's why, even though sometimes it's another topic that might not be sexy, it's necessary in order to be able to make things interoperable and shareable and broadly consumed and understood. So to begin with, we don't have one single type of mapping. So we have multiple flavors, multiple languages in which to express them, multiple ways of understanding mappings, but they can kind of at a very high level be divided into big groups that are exact or similar. So some mappings are going to be very precise. It's going to be one object in one model to another object in another model. That's the ideal situation, because that will give you the best data exchange and integration approach. You are not losing any information when you move content from one to the other, or when you try to understand what one thing means on the other system. But most times you don't have that. Most of the times you have some sort of subsume or some sort of containment mapping, in which a concept is more generic in one than in another, or that some parts are mapped, but some other parts are not. So mappings are more complex than the kind of the exact mappings that we would like to have all the time. And then also you have multiple levels in which you can implement this. So you might have the conceptual level mapping, in which you relate concepts at the very high level without looking to all the attribute definitions or the details of the content, but you want to understand that, for instance, a variable is a variable and it's a variable, and that would be the first approach, because that variable might be expressed in multiple different words. So it might not be as easy as just looking at the word and understanding what it means. Although we like to encode a lot of content, usually in names, that usually can be misleading as well. The next level is logical, so in which you have a tighter relationship between the models, and also you are closer to have an implementation oriented mapping. And in this case, also you can have the similarity versus exact, but at least you have attribute level mappings. You have a way of moving content from one side to the other. And then finally, we have the physical, in which you have syntax representations that are machine actionable. So basically, with those three levels, you can cover a lot of ground. It's usually the case that we start with the conceptual and then we go down. But sometimes you have the syntax representation and you need to get to the actual data translation without really fully understanding the conceptual space. Next, please. So this one, this is a kind of a picture that I find is useful for understanding basically the inexact type of mappings, especially. So how the different types of, or different ways in which the content might not be exact. So you can have partial equivalence, in which something is entirely contained in another, or when you go to different parts, or when you have some overlap. That is gonna be the trickier situation, I guess, because it's gonna say that, yeah, this is somehow related, but I'm not sure exactly how. So we want to capture that information, but it's not gonna be very useful for data translation. So this is kind of, again, some sort of ideas that people have put out there. So this is coming from the Encyclopedia of Knowledge Organization, but there are tons of resources in which people have tried to model mappings and try to look at mappings over the past 20 years, between models, between ontologies more recently, between database schemas, even a long time ago. But this is a problem that has appeared in data-related spaces and domains for decades. Next, please. So when you get to the physical level, or even before that, but when you need some sort of machine actionable representations of conceptual, logical, or physical, we need to have some formal language to express these things, these relationships. So SCOS is kind of the ideal candidate for that, at least again, to have a very basic and at the same time rich way of relating concepts and different concept schemes. And it provides this set of property, yes, associations between concepts, properties in the language of RDF that are kind of extensions of mapping relation in different ways, like close match, broad match, narrow match, and related match are all subproperties of mapping relation, and exact match is a property of close match. But in one way or another, they are all extending that mapping relation, which is the kind of a very generic object for relating concepts. So so here you have a way of saying that two things are exact the same, and therefore the mapping can be used for content exchange in all situations. That would be exact match in the middle. Also, you have a way of saying that, yeah, these things are related, but I don't know exactly how, but I wouldn't bet on making a symmetric and transitive that is equivalent, almost equivalent relation. But it's useful for conceptual mappies, that would be close match. And then you have the ability to say that something is broader or narrower. So, or it's, well, it's related. Simply. So you have many ways of saying that something is not exact here, which is always good in order to understand how things can be organized hierarchically or not. So this kind of is the first way in which you can have some standard way of expressing mappings in the machine actionable format. Next, please. Now, stepping back, this is another slide trying to look at why are we doing this? Well, DDI is trying to map to many standards, as Arofan mentioned, and here it's just a few of them. And these are the most important ones that we are considering right now as TASCAN in the international community, especially national statistical agencies. But I'm pretty sure that this cover kind of a lot of ground for most users, because at some point you need to kind of understand how DDI relates to schema.org or DCAT or probably in order to have some provenance and lineage. And also at the top, you have these conceptual frameworks that are beyond just models that represent concepts. They are also guides, and they are frameworks that can help people figure out how to organize statistical production. GSBPM, for instance, it has a set of building blocks for describing what we do in statistical organizations. GSIM describes the information objects that GSBPM uses. The CISDA, the Common Statistical Data Architecture, has produced a set of information capabilities, which is another take on what we do, but specifically targeted to information and data processing and management and also governance. And then those three in particular have been looked at and tried to be integrated over the past few years in the UNEC modern stats context. In fact, there is current work on the core ontology for official statistics led by Frank Coton that is looking at integrating all those models, and we can use that as well as part of the DDI integration. And also, we can also provide feedback to that activity from the DDI point of view. So there is a notion of mapping that is kind of universal or being looked at different levels of granularity and for different purposes and use cases, but they are all trying to do this type of interoperable approach, because everybody is trying to be fair, because that's the way of making sure that the data can be shared and used and integrated. Next, please. So now I'm going to go very quickly over a few of those mapping exercises at the conceptual level. So the first one is DDI to GSBPM. So we've been trying to do this mapping with Wendy Thomas for a couple of years now. We did some progress in terms of how to organize this mapping, and this is kind of the main use case for this is, well, if I need to do something with DDI, first of all, which product do I use? And second of all, which objects for which purpose? So we try to come up with the common conceptualization of objects in DDI products and where they are used the most. So basically, you will know that if we are doing design, then you have to look at methodology, represented variables, development activities, and so on. But if you are in the building space, based on the GSBPM phases. But this is also part of any life cycle model. Then you need to go deeper than that, and you need to look at variables as opposed to just represented variables, and you need to look at instruments and questions and control constructs if you are doing data capture, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of the step back and trying to help the users to decide which objects to use in which context. And the same can be done for other models as well. So how do we relate, or which objects do we use? We use SDMX in the case of statistical organizations that are looking at not just DDI, or we use DDI. Well, the answer to that question might be, well, it depends on what you are doing. So this is kind of starting to look at that space from the DDI point of view. Next, please. So this is another attempt to do that from the DDI and SDMX point of views to the capability. So this was a kind of the very first draft that we did a couple of years ago. And the idea is that, well, if you are doing information sharing, data transformation, integration, well, DDI and SDMX are very important candidates there. But if you are doing, for instance, I don't know, concept mapping and matching, well, DDI might be a stronger content than there, although SDMX version 3 might also cover a lot of that. That part I don't know yet, so this is based on version 2.1. Provenance and lineage, again, is kind of more on the DDI side, whereas data abstraction, modeling, and so on could be done with either. So again, this is not final, so don't take it with a grain of salt, but it's kind of to show what type of mappings people are interested in, just to be able to discuss and to put together frameworks that seem to be unrelated. Next, please. This is another attempt of mapping at the conceptual level between GSIM on the right-hand side in green and DDI, CDI on the left in the blue. And again, this is another way of doing mappings that is not just one object to one object. We can first try to do this type of grouping as part of the mapping, saying, well, let's separate definitions for representations. At the top, you have in the same box first saying, well, these are all the objects and the classes that are going to be part of the representation level. And then once you do that, then you start saying, well, code item in one side, maps to code, which is not represented here with an arrow, just for simplicity. But you will see for the names that they are very similar. So classification item on the right, there's a classification item on the left. So you would expect that it's the same, but that's not always the case either. As I mentioned, just similarity of name that's implies similarity of meaning, or exactness of meaning. So this is again a way of doing this conceptualization. Again, not machine actionable. It's just UML and a very, very rough type of mapping. But that's where people usually start. Trying to figure this out. Next, please. Here is more one class at a time level. So basically, each layer here in this picture is the same concept and is supposed to be an exact mapping. So a variable in GSIM is a conceptual variable in CDI, is a conceptual variable in lifecycle, an object variable in Neuchâtel, and the data element concept in 179. So just to show that that there is some sort of usual alignment in these models, but until we work on the mapping, until we kind of formalize this in some way, we don't know for sure, and we cannot exchange data easily. And next, please. Next, yeah.
So, Flavio, do you want to do this, or you want me to take back over?
No,
it doesn't matter.
No, take it back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Flavio. I mean, Flavio gave you a very quick tour of some of the mappings that StatsCan is doing, but I think people have had enough experience in this area and with what he just showed you to understand that, you have a lot of very different mappings for different functions at different levels, but also different kinds of mappings. I really like the slide that Flavio showed with SDMX and DDI superimposed on CSDA, because that highlights the fact that the context, the purpose, a functional purpose of any given mapping is going to drive what the low-level mapping has to be. And that walks you from the conceptual level down to the physical level in the way that he's talking. And I think people have looked at trying to come up with standard mappings, understand pretty clearly that there are a huge number of potentially useful mappings, but that it's very resource intensive to produce them, and that you have to involve a lot of people if you're going to get them right, which is technical people, business level people, users at all sort of different levels. And the other thing I'd like people to notice here is that DDI exists in all these slides as part of a bigger picture, that you have these business systems, and DDI is going to play a role in each of those, but it's not the only thing in each of them. Something to think about too is that the mappings between DDI and some of these other standards are not always completely generic. There may be things about organizations or communities that use them in specific ways that mean that a mapping that we as a standards body could produce would only go so far in meeting the actual need on the ground as part of an existing system in somebody's business. And so that's those are all considerations I think that we need to think about. I'd like to switch gears here now a little bit and talk about the second part of this, which is implementation guides. We're not going to take as much time on this, but I just wanted to mention these briefly because I think they're very related. And it's another thing that implementers have to deal with all the time. And I'm using implementation guides in a particular way here. When I'm talking about these, I'm really talking about subsetting the set of available fields in a given model of specification, whether that's a schema or a UML diagram or what it is, whatever it is. The specific uses of standard features, that is, we're using this element out of codebook, how are we populating it in our organization? And then configurations, like the choice of controlled vocabularies is a good example of that in DDI, where you can use a lot of different vocabularies for different things, and you can configure the spec to do specific things. All of those kinds of decisions have to be made in implementations, and the way you typically document that is with what I'm calling an implementation guide. It's an old idea. It's certainly been around since the 80s with the old flat file syntaxes, and a lot of the standards like SDMX came directly out of that world originally. So there's a long tradition of documenting the use of a standard structure in a specific implementation, in a specific community, in a specific exchange. And I think that's always been kind of part of what DDI has done as well. With DDI codebook, very early on, you had the Nestar sort of default profile, and then the International Household Survey Network came up with one. CESTA has another one. ICPSR is a slightly different one. These are all selections of the elements in DDI codebook with some information about how they're used, and they're documented in different ways, usually just in written form. In fact, always, I think, in just written form. And so that's been around as long as codebook is around, been around almost. In DDI lifecycle, we added this idea of DDI profiles, which was the idea that you could actually express the selection of elements and the use of elements in an implementation in a machine readable, machine processable way. And in some places like the Australian Bureau of Statistics, I think UKDA and Closer, I don't know, John, Darren, you can tell me if I'm misremembering this, but I think you did some work for people doing field work like NatCent, those kinds of organizations, because you wanted to specify the metadata you got around the data they collected under contract. I think that was you guys, but it was some group in the UK was looking at that. So we've had people take this idea of DDI profiles and actually use it in the past. But I will say, I think that we've never had a very completely considered approach to implementation guidance generally. And that's kind of why I'm raising it in this ignition talk here. With DDI CDI, we're actually seeing that this is becoming much more important because DDI CDI is model driven. And although we're moving in a lot of ways more towards a model orientation of DDI with lifecycle particularly, DDI CDI is the first of our products that's going to be primarily a model-based standard. And the idea is that it can be expressed in multiple and variable syntaxes that interoperate because they are all pictures, they're all implementations and representations of the same underlying model. And that is a powerful idea, very flexible idea, very modern sort of best practice for standards, but it comes at a cost. And this means a lot of mapping between different syntaxes at the physical level. And it also means that people need to indicate in their implementation guides how they bound the model into a syntax, okay? And that's a complicated thing to do, actually. And we will be producing sort of canonical reference syntaxes, if you will, in XML, and we're working on RDF now. And that we're going to produce those the same way we always have. But the idea behind CDI is that the model is the main thing, and that any implementer should be able to generate their own syntaxes and have that be a valid implementation of CDI, and that that should interoperate at a model level with any other implementation. So again, this is putting more and more emphasis on this idea of implementation guidance and documentation of what you've done with a standard model. This is really important because of FAIR, basically. FAIR puts this enormous emphasis on data reuse. And there is a lot of discussion around things like FAIR implementation profiles and different mechanisms for explicitly stating what a given community is using to make their data fair. And if we really want the FAIR vision to be realized in an effective way, in a scalable way, we're going to need explicit and preferably machine actionable statements of what metadata is available, how it's modeled, at a very fine-grained level for all of the FAIR data resources. Now that's a big ask, obviously, but there's a big payoff, because at the end of the day, if we can sort of realize this idea of FAIR within domains, across domain boundaries, that's your on-ramp into these very large-scale data sharing infrastructures. And I'm talking about things like the European Open Science Cloud, Global Open Science Cloud, African Open Science Platform. I forget the name of the Canadian one, Flavio, you probably know. There are lots of these infrastructures cropping up, and they're all in the early stages, and they all seem a little ambitious. But if you're really gonna share data at that level, you're talking about something that would allow you to programmatically understand the metadata available on any given data set and to determine if it's sufficient, whether you can support it in your systems, and to work with it. We've been learning about this as we've talked to other domains with CDI, and the recent Dagstuhl workshops last fall gave us a lot of insight into this. We actually started developing a methodology for writing community implementation guides, and that's sort of an outliney draft at this point. And it's maybe a little too early to do that, but we were learning from working with specific use cases that you did need to specify in profiles what you were using and talk about how that was going to be bound into either a reference syntax or some other syntax. Helmholtz Association in Germany is one of the biggest. It's a huge network of research institutions, and there's hundreds of them. And they've been looking at using CDI as one of a set of standards in their metadata collaboration. They're doing an exploration of it. And they started writing a guide to inform their users about this profile. And that was an example of what an implementation guide might look like. Frank, I think you're on the call. You've been driving the Interstat project, and with mappings. And again, CDI is one of a set of standards that have to be mapped together, but you're selecting certain pieces of the metadata to implement in that solution. We looked at other use cases, ESS, Searle. I mean, there's a growing list of these. And the point is that writing implementation guides is going to be effectively necessary in every one of those communities. And we should make it easy for people to do. What we're learning is that RDF representations are going to be very, very common, possibly more common than XML representations for CDI. We're seeing that there is a list of standards that are coming up with a lot of frequency, especially DCAT, Prov, schema.org, and there are a couple of others on that list. SCOS is going to be so common that we're actually supporting it directly within CDI. SCOS is going to be incredibly common. And when Flavio looked at the mapping capabilities of SCOS, fine, but it's also capable of expressing things like classifications. And code lists, a very important standard for us. We're running into a lot of formalized ontologies. Some of them are generic, like around units of measure. Some of them are domain specific. And those are going to be the places where people plug in their own, what we call a controlled vocabulary, that is in fact a domain ontology expressed in RDF. That's going to be very, very common. So we're learning what the landscape might look like, but it's early days yet. What is pretty clear is that DDI CDI is going to be generated from existing codebook and existing lifecycle where those resources are available. We designed it not to be a replacement. We designed it to be an additional layer to enable FAIR. And I think that is one set of mappings that are going to be critical and actually will be fairly straightforward, I'm hoping. We've been working on those within the CDI group, but the idea that you're going to need to link back to the source metadata from a CDI instance is clearly a requirement here, and the spec will make that possible. There's still a lot of open questions here, but we're learning a lot about this space. It does put a lot of emphasis on implementation guidance, though. I think the work of writing implementation guides could be very complicated, so we should try to make it easier for implementers. And the more we can do that, the more adoption there'll be of the spec. I think that's what we're learning from CDI. And I think that a lot of those lessons extend also back to lifecycle and codebook. And I know there's a lot of effort within TC now to try to approach things in a mature way, in a sustainable way that is consistent across the different products. And I think that is exactly the right direction, which is why I want to throw this issue of implementation guides on the table, because I think they're important not only for CDI, but for all of our specs. So, you know, the audience for consuming metadata is going to grow as FAIR becomes a reality. And that puts a lot of demands on us as an organization. We need better documentation to support reuse at scale, because your new users may not be as familiar with your community. DDI CDI is actually a pretty small model, but it already needs this implementation guide kind of information as a critical component of a system. And at the end of the day, that kind of FAIR metadata is going to be a prerequisite for participating in these large scale infrastructures. So we're just throwing this out there as an area that maybe deserves more focus than it's traditionally got within the Alliance. So my last slide here is just this, and this is really just to sort of start the discussion, I guess. We have actually run into some pretty good mappings. This was in one of the European Open Science Cloud interoperability forums. They had published a table mapping, among other things, DDI with a bunch of other standards. We saw this and we were like, oh, that's great. Who publishes this? And the answer is nobody. It was buried in a working document. And there's an idea that a lot of these informal mappings exist. Maybe we as an alliance could publish some reference mappings between DDI and some of the other important standards and promote those in a better way than we've done in the past. We've always done them, but maybe we haven't focused on them as well as we could. Can we have a consistent way of describing mappings? And maybe most importantly, the purpose and business context of them. How do they fit into the kinds of levels that Flavio was discussing? And can we do that in a consistent way across DDI work products so that DDI developers know what to expect? I think there are a bunch of questions there that we could think about. And some of this is stuff we've tried to do in the past. Maybe we have new ideas about it. I'm just putting it on the table. Can we provide templates and methodologies for doing implementation guidance? We're going to try to do that in CDI. But again, could that be consistent across the DDI work products? Could there be some better way of disseminating those and drawing attention to them? I think maybe so. And again, there's this idea of, can we have machine actionable expressions and put those in a centralized place where they become resources in a live way on the internet? And I think there's a lot of discussion about that in terms of RDF within the Alliance and within the URN resolution, but that also touches on this idea of additional information to support implementers, like mappings, like implementation guidance. And so I think there's some useful ideas there. I'm going to stop here. Flavio, I don't know if we ignited anything with that, but I don't think they can fault us for not trying. Anyway, so that's it for the presentation portion of this. So over to discussion, Hilda.
Okay, thank you very much, Arofan and Flavio, for your presentation. These are all important topics. We had one question in the chat here from Slava. Slava, would you like to talk about your question a little? Or?
Yeah, so my question is about machine learning. So did you consider to use machine learning to establish conceptual mappings?
I think that kind of thinking is going on, Slava, in not within the CDI group itself per se, because we haven't really gotten that far. Within projects that are using CDI, there has been some consideration of that. Specifically, there's the Inspire, which is going on in Africa. We're working with OMOP that involves a lot of mapping out of different systems into the OMOP common data model, and from there into DDI. And a lot of the source metadata is in DDI. But it's all done according to different organizational standards. We're seeing that a lot of people are using things like machine learning to help with that, but that's sort of exploratory and very much focused on that one project. I think there's a lot of potential exploration we could do there. I think it's a great idea. I think the work that I've seen so far is still pretty early stages, I would say, and not being done by the Alliance per se, but by implementers working in the field. There may be other examples that I'm not aware of also, Slava. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, so we also did some exploration already, and we used pipeline to get information from CMDI. So it looks very promising, I would say. And now we're looking into customized models. Basically, we need community to help us with building models. And I'm pretty sure we can get really good results. The second question, do you know something about SEMAF? And this is semantic mappings framework.
Only that I've heard of it a bit. I've heard people talk about it. I'm not a semantic technologies guy primarily. We're relying on people. Well, Frank is here, right? Somewhere in the audience, or he was. We have people in the community, I think we're pretty good with that. We've been working with Helmholtz with a guy named Pierluigi. What is Budigi? I always mispronounce his last name. He's talked about it. And they're doing a lot of work in the UN in the oceans area, looking and in different domains that are not really traditional DDI domains. So I think that there's an interest in some of these technologies, but again, we haven't gotten to the point where we're really exploiting that or looking seriously at that, and that's maybe something we should do.
I just copied link in chat, so probably this is for further investigation. But we actually implemented proof of concept, and it works with Dataverse, and it allows to get stuff from. So just very simple use case, what we did. We're getting any data set from Dataverse, and after we are querying different Cosmos instances, we're collecting all possible links, and we are doing enrichment of metadata, and using these semantic mappings, we are placing it back in Dataverse. So basically, you will get kind of 5-star data set with all mappings to all possible control vocabularies. And after second part should be running this NLP pipeline with machine learning, actually to define context and to get from all links to detect all links that could be linked to the specific data set. Because there is a lot of bias and some of links are not relevant if you're just matching without context.
I would really like to follow up with you from a CDI perspective. That is very, very much in line with a lot of discussion that's going on around CDI right now. And that may also be true for other of the standards, but I'm involved with the CDI working group. Probably we wouldn't have time to get to geek too much on this right now, Slava, but I think particularly using Dataverse as a platform for that makes a lot of sense to me. And there are different flavors of DDI that might be available that might contribute to that. I would love to see what you're doing, I have to say.
Okay, so I can also, we are writing paper now, and it will be published very soon, so I can share draft if you'd like.
Okay. I think that yes, I mean, to your first question about machine learning, we are playing with machine learning the StatScan a lot, and I see playing because we were still in the phase of proof of concepts and testing stuff. We don't have lots of machine learning solution at the production level, but yeah, we applied machine learning to mappings, but between code sets. So basically what we want to do is translate data that has some classification or some variable coded in one way to data that is coded in another way, or integrate data sets that are that basically have different code sets for the same variable, let's say. So you want to find those correspondences at the code level. So for that in particular, yes, we haven't that type of approach for mappings across the model, like saying whether a data set is a data set or whether a variable on one level maps to another variable. That type of more kind of broader approach across models, has not been attempted at scan as far as I know.
Mhm.
But yeah, these links are this link is very good. So that we need to continue on that on the semantic mapping.
So basically, what you're saying, you already have some knowledge graph, probably mapped manually, right? And
yes,
you-
so yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, we are doing we are put into as a knowledge graph, but that knowledge graph is broader than classifications or code sets. It's just that the machine learning have been applied on data that is coded, and that's the use case basically.
Mhm.
How to integrate data with different coding approaches, or whether the variables are really the same or not. We are using that on the probabilistic record linkage. So it's a kind of more on the data side rather than on the metadata to metadata.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. So what we did is more on metadata level. However, there is also this SEMAF with semantic mappings. We also investigated how to map to codes. So we can also do that.
Very good.
And I think, well, it looks very promising, because as soon as community will start to help us in annotation. So basically, we also establish an annotation service that people can use, and they can correct annotations, and they can share annotations with other people. And also we're supporting 12 languages, I believe. So it can be really interesting international effort to do that.
Flavio, did you say that you were looking at applying that to record linkages, to probabilistic record linking? Because that would be incredibly interesting to hear about. I have to say that's a big problem with us, because we're dealing with longitudinal population data and then clinical data, and the record matching is incredibly difficult. But that's something that I would be interested in learning more about. Anyway.
Okay, yeah, we can follow up on that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Wendy, you raised your hand.
Yes, this kind of just goes back to the mapping and the business cases for, excuse me, that the work that the technical committee is doing is a lot of it is based on the fact that we have shifted in the past few years from kind of the monolithic here is DDI to a suite of products, and not only in allowing people to determine what product to use, because different products cover different high-level conceptual areas, different subsets of the overall coverage of DDI, and facilitate different uses. And one of the things we wanted to be able to do was have people be able to enter data into one product and shift the content over to another if they wanted to provide a different set of applied uses, particularly say if you were, say, documenting your own research in codebook, but you then put it into an archive who wants to expand and add the abilities that Lifecycle or CDI may provide for it. So that level, but also as we're going a shift in the overall development in DDI from being just here's an addition to one product and it's put in, and then someone says, well, that should be in a second product, is for new areas to look at what are the overall needs, how might those needs be modeled, and then how would it be expressed in one or more of the appropriate DDI products. So it's that shift from not only allowing people better understanding of which product to use for which purposes, and transfer information between products, but also from the development aspect of being able to look at a development area and then see how it gets applied to different products.
Thank you very much, Wendy. This is useful information. Other comments or questions to the talk by Arofan and Flavio, or to the discussion? Share experiences or?
Well, I mean, if I can just say one thing, because we're constructing a CESDA metadata model at the moment. We're attempting to have an abstracted CESDA metadata model that maps out to multiple DDI standards. So if there was a consistent way, as it says on this slide, of doing that, that would be really helpful and have wider applicability as well. I mean, at the moment, I'm thinking of some kind of RDF vocabulary that allows us to build a graph structure to do that, but I don't know whether that's going down a rabbit hole or not.
Yeah, some comments to that. Flavio mentioned SCOS here.
Yeah,
Yes,
Scott, are you thinking of kind of using close match, exact match, broad match, and those kinds of things?
Yes, but again, that would be one way of dealing with the mappings within the context of RDF and semantic graphs. So once you have that infrastructure and you have the models in RDF, then using SCOS is kind of straightforward, and it gives you a lot of mapping capabilities in terms of those properties.
Okay.
Still is not enough, because the hierarchies are not taken into account there. It's one-to-one. It's basically saying, well, this class is linked to this class, and sometimes just because those two concepts are related, the way they are used higher up or farther away from there in the graph are different. So I'm not sure how to capture that with the standard, at least, because there are non-standard approaches. People have looked at this for the past couple of decades, and yeah.
Have you seen SSSOM, you guys? Because they're using the SCOS relationships to do mappings between ontologies. This is coming out of
yeah. What was that? SSOM.
SSSOM, a simple system for semantic ontology mapping or something. I forget what it stands for.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
But it's you can Google it and find it. It is a very, very simple framework that's basically applying the SCOS relationships to mapping between ontologies. I'm not sure I think it has the same problems that you're mentioning, Flavio, but I know that that's been used a lot within the UN, the oceans people I was talking about, and some of the other UN domains, not so much DDI domains. That seems to be their tool of choice for doing harmonization across their ontologies anyway. That might be a place to start. I don't know.
No, thanks for the tip. I'll definitely look at that.
Yeah, other questions or comments regarding the presentation? Noemi?
Hi.
Hi.
And thank you. Yes, I would like to mention the relation of the three topics discussed here. As you mentioned, FAIR is its important aspect in this mapping and implementation guides topics. As FAIR based strongly in persistent identifiers, could the URN resolution help in these fields? I don't know how it is in DDI, CDI, but in DDI3, are there URIs to each element of the schema to map with other schemas?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's clear, the question, but yeah, I have this topic about mapping with our systems, and then to refer to a persistent identifier to each element in the metadata schema.
Anyone would like to try to answer or follow up on that discussion?
I can try, Hilda.
Okay, thank you.
Naomi, you've raised a great topic, because anybody who's working in systems these days is typically dealing with a lot of RDF, and that means dealing with the URIs, right? URNs and URIs are not the same thing, or URLs and URNs are not the same thing. And URNs tend to be more of a closed system approach, and that's because of the nature of DDI metadata, that was the design choice we made in the past. Now, it is certainly the case that there are systems that have to communicate between the DDI identifiers, the URNs, and the expression of those as URIs. I think this is a topic that deserves to be addressed strongly. It's certainly something that has come up with the DDI CDI implementation. And in many cases, it would be nice if you could simply use the URIs as your persistent identifiers. And that's similar to what you see with DOIs now. I don't think, and someone can tell me that I'm wrong, and I'm not sure what's going on with life cycle in this area, but this is something we have to solve and something that we should focus on. And as we look at RDF becoming a more and more common serialization of our metadata, we can't not deal with that question. So I'm not answering your question, Noe, I'm sorry, but I do think it's super important, and it's certainly something that's come up and that we've been looking at. So that's the best I can do, Hilda, with this. But I think it's a fair question, and I think it's a good one for us to focus on. Someone tell me that we've done something in that area that I'm not aware of, please.
Thank you. That helps.
Okay, very good. That's good to hear. And well, if there are no more questions or comments regarding this topic, maybe we could focus a little on the last part, which is related to this type of meeting. So let's see here. Yeah, as Ingo said in the introduction, this was an effort from our side to try to have a little different meeting than what is specified in the bylaws. The annual meeting, which is more about reporting and presentation of plans, to kind of create a little more engagement and exchange information with the community about things going on in the scientific board and related work in the working groups, and also what the scientific community think is important. And what we would like to ask you about is if you like the idea of this, to have these meetings, and how often we should try to have them, if you like it. And we were thinking like we could do twice a year, maybe one in the winter and one in combination with the annual meeting. So that could be a little longer. We could have something like this, and then the reporting and the presentation of plans afterwards, or something like that. And then you see now what we did today, and maybe you have ideas for other things we could do or suggestions for improvements. And also we would like, if you like this type of meetings, what would be your ideas for possible topics? That is the best, things we really would like to ask you about. And yeah, so any input for that regarding this meeting? Did you like it? Or other ideas of things we could do? How often, if you like them, how often should they be? Ideas for future topics? No comment, or I see you, John, have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been an interesting couple of hours. I think it is a good forum for the community to hear what's going on in the various working groups and what's broadly happening. So I think it's an opportunity for us to communicate more directly to the members. Just the once a year is fine, but increasingly people won't necessarily want to travel halfway around the world just to go to a DDI meeting, however good they are. So online, is a good way of communicating. I think everyone's getting used to it. So I think it's a good initiative, and I think a couple of times a year. I mean, I would personally think we should do 3 meetings a year, including the main meeting that's along iAssist. But let's go with 2 to start with and see where we go. But
thank you very much for this. And Yeah, anyone, there are two more chats we could go back to, but other ones who would like to comment on this, or have ideas for topics, or then we can go to the chat. It is a little complicated for me to navigate this now, I realize, but okay, let me see.
Hilda,
Here.
do you want me to read the chats?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, so Darren had put a chat message in about mapping, and so I'm not going to read that full comment, but that has some good information there if people want to refer to that. Wolfgang said, I like to have the opportunity to get an overview information. Twice a year sounds very good to me. And Knut says, I like this kind of meeting. Twice online sessions a year are good. Also, more shorter ones are possible. And then Frank said, I found the meeting interesting and agree to the proposal of 2 a year.
Okay, very good. Thanks for all this positive feedback. Would some of you like to talk a little about this, or you're happy to just comment in the chat? That is also fine and much appreciated. So if no further topics, then we would like to, yeah, Wolfgang, you raised your hand. So.
Okay, you asked us to give some impression, and maybe one idea would be to go into the working groups and ask them if they would like to present their work, like we have done that today. That was really interesting to hear this, how things are going with certain topics, and it may be also valuable for the controlled vocabulary working group or the training working group. And I think for me, I found this really interesting, and it would be good also to hear from the other working groups from time to time.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang, for this input. That is very useful, and we try to follow up on that suggestion. And otherwise, are there other things you would like to raise just now? If you have some input for us. Otherwise, you have our contact addresses here for Ingo and me, and you can write to us about everything that regards the scientific board, and we'll bring it up at the meeting. Now I see John has his hand up. And
yeah, just to say that for those who are into this sort of thing, you can follow what is going on with the working groups and the scientific committee, and that includes the technical committee, by subscribing to Atlassian, and it will ping you when updated. So some groups are more active than others, so you may get a very full inbox or slightly full inbox, but that is certainly where you can. I mean, one of the things that has been really good about the Alliance in the last few years is adopting Atlassian as a good way of just keeping track of what's going on and notifying people. So I would urge people who have an interest to at least subscribe and see what happens, and then choose their way of filtering it and into the discussion.
Good point. And please also contact us if you're interested to kind of join our work. That is also always appreciated, because the working groups always welcome new people. So, and then Achim.
Yeah, I got a totally unrelated topic. So
okay.
Because yeah, you heard Wolfgang now, and I think almost everybody knows Wolfgang. And I would like to introduce him now as the official GESIS representative in the DDI Alliance. And the background is I will retire at the end of next month, and then withdraw from all my DDI Alliance roles. That's it. So Wolfgang, welcome as official representative.
Thank you, Achim. That's nice to hear that in this round, but I definitely will not take all the roles that you had in the past, and everybody knows that these footsteps are quite big, so I will start with small ones.
Okay, thank you very much to you both, and welcome you, Wolfgang. And I'm sure, I hope, we'll still keep Achim in for some of the tasks. In addition, of course, we would like to thank you, Achim, but we would like to do that on a special event. So now it is just a little thank for you, but we hope to do something more nice for you later on.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Yeah. So yeah, we are almost on the hour now, and before we finish, I would like to thank everybody for taking part in this and for being so active in the discussion. Thanks to the presenters, and for you on the scientific board and the presenters today who have time to stay on for a little debrief would be good. So if you have time, please. And for all you others, thank you very much, and see you at the next occasion, and continue to work with you in the working groups and on the boards and everything. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.